Hello guys, and welcome to our video on carbon. And the three major themes that we're going to be covering today are organic chemistry, the versatile bonding of carbon, and chemical groups. So let's start off with our first theme, organic chemistry. So organic chemistry is the study of all the compounds that contain carbon. The reason that this is so is because carbon is present in all life forms that we know of today. Now, to explore the history of organic chemistry and why organic chemistry is called organic chemistry, we have to go back in time, and we realize that there used to be a theory that is called vitalism, which basically stated that organic compounds arose only in living organisms, which were not controlled by chemical or physical laws that apply to supposedly inanimate objects. However, vitalism was disproved when a German chemist made a substance called urea, which is an organic compound, from supposedly inorganic compounds such as NH2. Now, another major experiment in organic chemistry occurred in 1952 when a graduate student named Stanley Miller proved that synthesis of complex organic molecules in the early Earth was possible from abiotic sources, so like comets, and other sorts of abiotic factors. So let's go over his experiment. So he had a bunch of flasks that were interconnected. They were interconnected using these glass tubes. And so in one flask he had water and heated up that water. In another flask he had gases like hydrogen, methane, ammonia, water vapor, and so on. And that's supposed to represent the atmosphere in the early Earth. And then he in another flask he had some sparks. He discharged some sparks, and that was supposed to represent lightning that occurred in the early Earth. And then he had a condenser to basically cool down the gases, and another flask for those gases to settle down once they became solid or liquid, and then so that he could study those chemicals. And so what he found was that he found organic molecules like amino acids from these abiotic sources. So that proved obviously that synthesis was possible. Now let's address our second theme, which is the versatile bonding of carbon. So when carbon makes 4 single bonds, a 109.5 degree angle is formed. So carbon always forms a tetrahedron when it makes 4 single bonds. So tetrahedron, think of that as a square pyramid, if you will, and often is a 109.5 degree angle. But in some cases it can be less when the atoms like to basically huddle near each other due to various forces between those atoms. So then we have our hydrocarbons, which consist solely of carbon and hydrogen, and they're really important to biology because fats are hydrocarbons. So we're going to learn a lot about lipids, phospholipids, and fatty acids, fats, and those kinds of things. And those are really important to biology. And it's also, of course, a key ingredient in petroleum, which obviously is originates from the nature and is biological in nature. And so that's also important to our economy and such things like that. Another good example is methane, which is used often in natural gas, so that's also really important there. So then we cover isomers. So isomers are basically compounds which have the same molecular formula but different structures. So if I wanted to write out one, then I would write out the molecular formula, but if I wanted to actually show the differences between isomers, I'd have to draw them out. So let's cover our 3 types. First is structural, and as you can see right here, they differ in their covalent partners. So a good example would be this hypothetical molecule right here. Just to clarify, these molecules don't exist in real life, but if they did, these would be examples right here at the top where I have our C, 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 C. That would be a good example versus the 4 C's with the C attached at the top. These two right here would be a good example of a structural isomer. They differ in their arrangement around a covalent bond or their covalent partners. So then we have our cis-trans isomer. So those differ in their arrangement around double bonds. So right here, this hypothetical molecule where X represents a hypothetical element, as you can see, two carbons bonded, and so you have two X's on the same side. But then, of course, on this other molecule right here, you have X's directly opposite each other that can form a diagonal. And so that's an example of a cis-trans isomer. You still have the exact same compound, just organized in a different way. And these are pretty important to many biological processes, including muscle contraction, because when the cis form of a certain molecule is converted into the trans form of that molecule, that triggers a whole set of reactions that occur that result in muscle contraction. So then we cover an enantiomer, which differs usually in the arrangement around an asymmetric carbon. So obviously this had to do with our tetrahedrons that we talked about earlier. So as you can see right here, this hypothetical element or compound CSBH, and then we have our H and S just switching places, and then that is obviously going to be an enantiomer because it's obviously changing around an asymmetric carbon because this is not a symmetric shape. So then we discuss our final theme, chemical bonds. So the five major chemical groups. So we have our five major chemical groups: hydroxyl, carboxyl, amino, methyl, and phosphate. So hydroxyl group is our first group, and hydroxyls have OH in them. So whenever we see an OH, then you know in the chemical structure or like a drawing, then you immediately know that that is a hydroxyl. So hydroxyls are always polar and hydrophilic, which means that they tend to have high electronegativities and they like to interact with water. And so the names when they're written out always end in OL. So that's why they're also known as alcohols. So when you hear about alcohols, that compound is usually a hydroxyl. So a good example is ethanol, which is being considered for use as a biofuel. Then we have our carboxyls, and these carboxyls tend to behave like acids because our hydrogen-oxygen bond is really, really polar because, as you know, oxygen has one of the highest electronegativities and hydrogen does not have a really high electronegativity. So you have a really, really, really polar bond right there. So obviously, whenever you see a COOH, then that's going to be an indication that we're dealing with a carboxyl. So a good example would be acetic acid. Then we talk about our aminos, and aminos tend to act as bases. But I really want to emphasize this. The most important thing that you have to know about members of the amino group is that not all amino acids are in the amino group. So there's a lot of amino acids out there that aren't. And so just because you know that a certain compound is an amino acid doesn't mean that it belongs to this amino group right here. But of course, there are some that do belong to the amino group. So for example, glycine is an amino acid that belongs to the amino group. And that's why amino group is really important because some amino acids do belong to this group. So then we talk about our methyl. And so our methyl groups contain CH3. And so whenever you see CH3, obviously you know it's a methyl. And so methyls are really important because they affect gene expression. When we talk about methylating a gene, or at least a part of a gene, then that area that is methylated is going to be be activated. The instructions of that gene will be expressed and executed, basically. So a good example is 5-methylcysteine, which is a DNA component that changes when modified by methyl addition. Then we have our final phosphate group. So phosphate groups are important because they confer the ability to react with water. And when they confer that ability to another compound that they interact with, that releases energy in the process. Another reason they're really important is because a lot of biological molecules, like ATP, which is the energy currency of in biology, that's really, really important because it affects a lot of things, including muscle contraction, plays a huge role in things like photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and so on. And so our phosphate groups are really important for that reason. Phosphate groups always contain PO4, which is an ion with -2 charge. So that is our three themes for today, which is organic chemistry, versatile bonding of carbon, and chemical groups in our video carbon. Please subscribe and like. Thank you for watching.